Whether you're an Eddie Van Halen geek who wants to learn the ins and outs of every riff, lick, and solo like me, or if you just want to add a little bit of that EVH flavor into your own playing style, I got you covered. Today I'm going to go over 10 essential techniques that you can infuse into your playing immediately for some of that Eddie Van Halen sizzle and swagger. So, let's dive in. Some of these techniques do have like subcategories, so I'm just going to give one example of each, and including the subcategories. So I think there's something like 20 or 22 examples in all, which is why I'm going to just keep it like one per specific technique. So if you do want, and then the tabs will be on the screen as I play through them. If you do want copies of the tabs, just comment Eddie down below and I'll get you a copy of the PDF, which will have some extra examples in it too. Because most of these are going to be off the first 2 or 3 albums. I mean, he really laid the groundwork early and just kind of kept building on it. Also, I'd like to mention that I'm playing these examples through the brand new Brown Sound 7879 plugin that ToneX just dropped like within the last, I don't know, week or so. Super bitchin' sounds, let me tell you. So for the first technique, I'm going to give some props to his riffing and rhythm playing. He tends to use a lot of triads and dyads as opposed to just hitting straight up power chords all the time. And so right off the first album, straight out of the gate, he hits us with a classic triad based riff with Runnin' with the Devil. Here's that one. So for a good example of dyads, again off the first album, there's the riff for Feel Your Love Tonight, which he introduces first as a single note riff, and then he adds the dyad with thirds and even perfect fourths. So here's that one. Technique number 2 I'm going to go over is his use of harmonics, and now there's several different versions of this. He's got the natural harmonics, which we have Right Away, again, and Runnin' with the Devil, and several other tracks. Then of course pinch harmonics, and how can I not use a ZZ Top inspired song like I'm the One to give an example of the pinch harmonics. Then on the second album, we hear for the first time this kind of random harmonic trick he does, where he just does repeated pull-offs on a string, and while he's doing it, you'd lightly want to drag your palm of your, like the side of your palm, the fleshy part here, just kind of drag that along the strings as you're doing your pull-off, and that'll sound like this. Also on the second album, we have his first use of tapped harmonics, both on Dance the Night Away and Women in Love. On Dance the Night Away, he uses both single note and chordal tapping. Here's an example of the chordal part that he taps on Dance the Night Away. And then for the single note tapped harmonics, I decided to put the classic intro to Romeo Delight from Women and Children first. Again, if you would like a PDF of these tabs plus some extra examples, just put Eddie in the comments below and I'll get you that. The third technique is the frequent use of wide bends in his solos, which really tends to give it a sense of energy. And so the example I use here is from also Romeo Delight. Technique number 4 is accomplished in a number of ways, and it's the use of wide intervals. We certainly have the stretching wide intervals a la Ice Cream Man, and he used this pattern or a similar pattern on a few other songs later on. Thankfully, these wide stretches tend to be above the 12th fret, or in the case of Ice Cream Man, it starts at the 12th fret, which helps a little bit. But you will notice, even when you see Eddie play this, that he'll tend to like put the guitar up like this, or else he'll get down in a really low position, because even though he had large hands, I mean 12 to 19, that is a pretty wicked stretch. So you may have to make some physical compensations in order to be able to pull that one off. And yet another way he gets wide intervals sounds in his licks is just the use of tapping. I mean, you can cover a lot more territory when you add an extra finger from your other hand, right? So here's an example of some tapping from Eruption. Technique number 5, Edward used a lot of legato phrasing. You know, there's not a ton of like straight picking in his soloing. There tends to be a lot of hammers, which is nice because as long as you've got a fluid fret hand, it makes some of that stuff easier to pull off. He does mix in some picking. However, like I noticed one of his favorite things to do seems to be this thing where he'll hammer 3 notes on a string and then pick the same frets on the next string. He does that like in I'm the One, Girl Gone Bad. There's a couple licks like that, just for a couple examples. But as far as the hammer-ons and pull-offs, I mean, the examples are so vast, I'm not even gonna, there's no sense giving a specific example of that. Just realize that he uses a lot of hammers and pulls in his style. Another technique that he uses, of course, is the tapping for this legato flavor in his style. Here's a cool tapping lick from the solo in You're No Good off Van Halen 2. And a variation he throws onto his tapping sometimes, he will throw in a little slide on the tap. Here's an example of that from the song On Fire. This fill kind of gets played a couple times in that song. Another thing he'll do is this like ghost hammer, where he just kind of, without picking a note first, you know, usually you think a hammer on, you pick a note and then you hammer on. But he would do this thing where he would just sound the note out of nowhere with hammering on. So like that. And a lot of times when he'll do that, he'll throw a little palm mute on there too to give it kind of a percussive feel, like this lick from Eruption, which he also repurposes a couple frets higher later in I'm the One and Somebody Get Me a Doctor. And another guy who likes to use the hammer out of nowhere with the light palm mute happens to be Nuno Bettencourt, who also is a huge Eddie Van Halen fan. And of course, I can't really talk about this technique without at least mentioning Cathedral from Diver Down. That whole song is built on the ghost hammer combined with delay effect. Technique number 6, Eddie would use a lot of non-scalar patterns where he just played the same fret pattern across all the strings and it's not actually a scale. This is another thing that lends itself well to playing real fast passages because it takes kind of the thinking out of it. You just play the same pattern and, you know, he had the motto, if it sounds good, it is good. And of course it sounded excellent when Eddie did it. So he has this pattern in I'm the One where he uses his first, second, and fourth fingers, and he does it in a few different positions, 3 altogether, counting the lead in on the solo. He does it at the 16th, 17th, and 19th fret in the intro, and then somewhere in one of the verse or pre-chorus there's a fill where he does it down at the 11th, 12th, and 14th fret. And then when the solo starts, he does it at the 6th, 7th, and 9th fret, just on a couple strings. And then another example of just following the same pattern across strings is this descending lick from I'm the One, where it's 12th, 14th, and 15th fret on the high E, B, and G strings. Kind of a mix of Dorian and blues scale if you think about it. Technique number 7, he was a master at blending major and minor pentatonic. One of my favorite ways he does it is with this tapping lick, where he keeps his tap finger stationary on the same fret, but then as he's tapping this triplet, he'll drop his fret hand chromatically. So he'll get from the minor pentatonic and then drop one fret at a time, and he ends up in the major pentatonic. This example is from I'm the One. He does the same thing also on the solo for You Really Got Me. Okay, this next thing may or may not be a blending of major and minor pentatonic. It's this position he does in Eruption, and it comes out several times throughout their albums. It's this thing where he's got the 14th, 17th, and 20th fret. And, you could look at it as just being like consecutive diminished arpeggios or triads. But the way I kind of look at it, if you break it into two segments, you got the 17 and 20. That would be like A minor pentatonic. And then you got 14 and 17, which is like A major pentatonic. So given the blues-based nature of his playing and, the thing I just touched on where he does that descending tap lick, it wouldn't surprise me if the idea here is to be crossing over the major and minor pentatonic scale. Just a thought. But here's the lick from Eruption where it's played for the first time. Okay, the 8th technique I'm going to cover here is Eddie's use of open strings and kind of a cross-picking thing. This kind of relates back to the earlier technique of wide intervals. This creates kind of a really interesting audio effect where you can have lower pitches sounding on higher strings because of the way he's doing these pull-offs and having open strings mixed in with fretted notes. This lick from Eruption is a classic example of what I'm talking about here. Technique number 9, can't do an Eddie Van Halen tutorial without talking about the whammy bar. Whammy bar dips and dives. So here's some rhythmic whammy bar dips thrown into the intro of Ain't Talking About Love. And then other times he'll do more dramatic, just kind of bombs, where he just dives, and there's plenty of that like in Eruption. But one of my favorite things he does is this little bit here from Ice Cream Man, where he pulls off like to the G string open, and then he dives with the bar, and then he kind of grabs the low E string when he releases the bar to come back up. Kind of the same thing I did at the beginning of this video. And technique number 10, of course we got to look at his tremolo picking. Mine won't do it justice, but he was a master at tremolo picking. All over, plenty of solos with tremolo picking from Ed. All the way from this classical inspired thing from Eruption. And then we've got this single string climb on Somebody Get Me a Doctor. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed those examples. So get to learn these, maybe come up with some of your own. I like learning Eddie's licks, but at the end of the day, it's always good to take your heroes licks and riffs and try to apply them in your own unique way too. Don't overlook that for sure. If you do want that PDF with these examples plus others, just drop Eddie in the comments and I'll get that to you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.